Welcome to Simply Explained English. I am Lisa.
And I'm Eric. Do you want to improve your English easily? If so, you're in the right place.
So let's get started and make English learning easy. Okay, Eric, what's on our list for today?
The first word today is stingy. Then we will continue with greedy and to mock. Then to call on. And the final one is put on an act.
Okay, let's start with the first word.
The first word of today is stingy.
Stingy.
Stingy. Stingy is an adjective. It describes a person who does not like to spend money or give things to others. When someone is stingy, they are not generous, and they try to keep as much as they can for themselves.
That's right, Eric. Stingy has a negative meaning and is often used to criticize someone who is too careful with their money. Now, let's give 2 example sentences to help everyone understand better.
Sure, here's my example. Tom is so stingy. He never buys gifts for anyone. It means that Tom does not like to spend money even when it is expected, like for gifts. He tries to save his money all the time.
Good example, Eric. My example is, she was too stingy to give even a small tip at the restaurant. It means she didn't want to spend extra money, even a small amount. This shows that she is not generous.
Exactly, Lisa. Now, let's give a short dialogue to show how stingy can be used in conversation.
Have you noticed how Paul never joins us when we buy coffee?
Yes, I have. He's quite stingy. He doesn't like spending money on anything.
I know. Last time, he didn't even want to give any money for the office birthday cake.
That's too bad. It's nice to share sometimes and not be too stingy.
That was a nice example, Eric. It shows how stingy is used to describe someone who doesn't like to share or spend money even in small amounts.
Yes, Lisa, it's a very descriptive word. What would you say about stingy?
Well, it's quite a useful word to describe someone who is very careful with their money or resources, and it's fairly common, especially when talking about money or people who don't like to give or spend money. It's important to know this word to describe certain behaviors or situations.
I agree, and it's important to remember that it has a negative meaning, so it's better not to use it directly about someone unless you know them well.
Good tip, Eric. So just remember, if you want to talk about someone who doesn't like to share or spend money, you can use the word stingy.
Exactly. Well, that's all for today's word, stingy. We hope you find it useful.
Okay, Eric, let's move on to our next word.
Yes, the next word we'll explain today is greedy.
Greedy.
Greedy. Greedy is an adjective describing someone who wants more than they need, especially more money, food, or power. When people are greedy, they are not satisfied with what they have and always want more and more.
Exactly. Greedy is often used in a negative way to describe people who take more than they need or want more than is fair. Eric, could you give us an example sentence?
Of course, Lisa. Here's the first example. The greedy man took all the cookies and didn't share them with anyone. This means that the man wanted all the cookies for himself and didn't want to share them with others, which shows selfish behavior.
That's a clear example. I'll give another one. She was too greedy and asked for more money, even after she got a raise. It means that she already got more money but still wanted more, which shows she was not satisfied.
Now, let's hear a short dialogue using the word greedy.
Did you see how Tom took almost all the pizza at the party?
Yes, I did. That was so greedy of him. There wasn't much left for everyone else.
I know. I think it's important to share and not be greedy in situations like that.
Exactly. It's always better to think of others too.
That dialogue shows how greedy is used to describe someone who takes more than their share without thinking of others.
Yes, and it's a word you'll often hear when people are discussing unfair or selfish behavior.
Eric, would you say greedy is a common word in English?
Absolutely. It's quite common and is often used when people want to talk about someone who is not generous or fair. It's often used in both formal and informal situations. It is also used to talk about people who want more and are not satisfied with what they have.
I agree. It's also important to understand social interactions and how people might understand certain actions.
Yes, so just remember, if you want to describe someone who always wants more than they need, you can use the word greedy.
Well, I think we have explained the word greedy enough, Eric. Now, let's move on to our next word.
The next word is to mock.
To mock.
To mock. To mock means to make fun of someone or something in a cruel way, often by copying them. It's about laughing at someone or imitating them. You try to show they're silly or stupid.
Good explanation, Eric. Let's look at some example sentences. Eric, can you give us the first one?
Sure, here's the first example. The children mocked the new student's accent.
It means that the children made fun of how the new student spoke, probably by copying his accent in a bad way.
Exactly. Now, Lisa, can you give us the second example?
Of course. Here's the second example. Don't mock your sister's singing. It's not nice. It means that someone is making fun of their sister's singing, maybe by imitating it badly.
Good example, Lisa. Let's listen to a short dialogue using mock.
Why are you upset, Tom?
Some kids were mocking my new glasses, Mr. Johnson.
That's not acceptable. We don't mock others in this class.
They kept imitating me and laughing at me.
Okay, Tom. I'll talk to them.
In this dialogue, we heard mock used twice. It showed how unkind behavior can hurt someone's feelings. Now, let's talk more about this word. Eric, what would you say about to mock?
It can be used in both formal and informal situations, but the act of mocking is usually considered impolite.
Good point. Do you think it's a common word?
Yes, it's quite common. Unfortunately, people sometimes mock others, so it's important to know this word.
I agree. Why do you think it's useful to learn this word?
It helps us describe an unkind behavior. It's also good to know, so we can understand if someone tells us not to mock others.
That's true. Any tips for our listeners on how to use it, Eric?
Yes, remember, to mock is usually negative. Use it to describe or discourage unkind behavior, not to encourage it.
Great advice. Listeners, try using mock in sentences, but remember to be kind in real life.
Yes, it's a word we should know, but an action we should avoid. Be nice to others.
Let's move on to our next phrase, Eric.
The next phrase we'll explain today is call on.
Call on.
Call on. Call on is a phrasal verb with a few different meanings. The first meaning is to ask someone to do something or to answer a question, especially in a formal or educational setting. The second meaning is to visit someone, usually for a short time.
If a teacher calls on a student, it means the teacher is asking the student to speak or answer a question. And if you call on a friend, it means you visit them at their home. Let's give some examples so our listeners can understand it better.
Sure. Here's the first example. The teacher called on Emily to answer the question. This means that the teacher asked Emily to speak and answer the question.
I'll give the second example for the second meaning. On my way home, I decided to call on my grandmother to see how she was doing. It means that I visited my grandmother's house to check on her and spend a little time with her.
Great examples. Now, let's talk a bit about grammar. Call on is a separable phrasal verb when it means to ask someone to speak. For example, the teacher called Emily on. But when it means to visit someone, it is inseparable, like call on my grandmother.
Yes, and it's quite a flexible phrasal verb that can be used in both formal and informal situations, depending on the context.
Now, let's hear a short dialogue using the phrase call on in both of its meanings.
In today's class, the professor called on me to explain my answer, and I wasn't prepared.
Oh no! That must have been stressful. Next time, just be ready in case she calls on you again.
I know. By the way, I might call on you this weekend if I'm in your neighborhood. We could have some coffee.
Sure, just let me know when you're nearby.
That dialogue shows how call on can be used both to ask someone to speak and to visit someone.
Yes, and it's a very useful word for everyday conversations. And it's quite common, especially in classroom or meeting settings when people are asked to speak.
It's also used in casual conversations about visiting someone.
I agree. It's important to know both meanings because they can often be used in different contexts.
Exactly. So remember, if you want to ask someone to speak or visit someone, you can use the phrase call on for both situations.
Good summary, Lisa.
Thank you, Eric. Okay, we have reached the last word today. What is the last word, Eric?
The last word today is put on an act.
Put on an act.
Put on an act. Put on an act is an idiom. It means to behave in a not sincere way, usually to deceive or impress someone. If someone is putting on an act, they are not being honest about how they feel, who they are, or what they say.
They act in a way to trick others or make a false impression. Eric, could you give us an example sentence?
Here's the first example. He seemed nice, but he was just putting on an act to get what he wanted. It means that he was pretending to be nice, but he wasn't really sincere. He just wanted something in return.
That's a good example, Eric. I'll give another one. She put on an act of being interested in the conversation, but she was actually bored.
It means that she pretended to be interested, but in reality, she didn't care about the conversation at all.
Great examples. Now, let's hear a short dialogue using the phrase put on an act.
Why is Tom acting so polite suddenly?
Oh, he's just putting on an act because the boss is here.
Really? He seems so different.
Yeah, he always puts on an act in front of important people. It's not the real Tom.
That dialogue shows how put on an act can be used to describe someone who is pretending to be different from who they really are.
Yes, and it's a very useful idiom when you want to talk about behavior that isn't sincere or honest. Lisa, what would you say about the idiom?
It's quite common in everyday conversations, especially when people talk about someone who is trying to deceive or impress others in a fake way.
Yes, and it's mostly used in informal situations when you want to talk about someone who is not being honest or genuine. It's a strong expression, so be careful when you use it.
I agree. And it's important to remember that it has a negative meaning, so it's usually not something positive.
Exactly, Lisa. Well, I think we have reached the end of our podcast today. Thanks for listening to Simply Explained English. We hope you found today's words helpful.
See you in the next episode with more simple English explanations.
Bye for now.